Everybody, Ambassador Kosh coming at you again with another video. Today we're going to discuss actually one of the main focuses of this channel, and that's going to be the 1980s, in particular pop culture of the 1980s. Now, a little background on me. I was actually born in 1978. 1 year after Star Wars A New Hope came out, or as it was just known then, Star Wars. No Episode 4, no New Hope, nothing. But granted, I was born in the late 70s, but I grew up in the 1980s. And this is one of the decades that I grew up in, that I loved, that I know a lot about, in particular pop culture, movies, comic books, the advent of video gaming, and all that stuff. And I'm not going to say I'm an authority. I just happen to grow up in that decade, and oh man, it was a great, great decade. This will just be kind of an overview because I will be doing videos on movies and so on within the 1980s and all sorts of other stuff, comic books, like I said, gaming, and so forth. And if I seem really enthused, I am, because the 80s, it was like lightning in a bottle. It was like, that's a good euphemism. It was like lightning in a bottle. That whole decade was incredible because you had the advent of MTV. Well, when it was actually MTV and not what it is now, but we're not going to go there. Now, there were so many great movies, so many great comic book runs that went on during the 1980s. It's kind of hard to encapsulate this into just one video. That's why I'm going to do a whole lot of videos on the 1980s, and I'm hoping at some point to get a few other people together, maybe some other smaller channels or anything like mine, and do some live streams and just dissect pop culture from the 1980s. We can delve into movies, we can delve into comics, we can delve into all sorts of stuff. So if you are intrigued by the 1980s, or you yourself grew up in the 1980s, then these videos are for you. And even if you're just curious about the 1980s, why it was such a magical time, why it was such a lightning in the bottle decade, I hope this channel will be a place where you can come, for lack of a better term, get your fix. I think today we'll just cover maybe one or two movies or anything that I really love from the 1980s, and we'll leave it at that for now. This is just popping up the top of my head and everything, or talking off the top of my head. But, well, I think for today, like I said, we'll just delve into a couple movies from the 1980s, and I'll do ones that are well known, I'll do ones that are kind of obscure, and so on, and we'll just work our way through the decade. Now, this won't be necessarily chronological order, going from 1980 to 1989. I may bounce around a little bit and everything. I may bounce around a lot. But this series is going to be for those of my generation, those that came after, who were like, what was so great about the 1980s? What was so cool about it? What was so interesting about it? Anyway, I think for me anyway, the reason why the 1980s was such a formative decade for me as a geek is because of all the great movies, all the great cinema that we had come out during that decade. And one movie in particular, and this was actually a Disney movie that came out that wasn't really well known. It didn't get a lot of traction in the box office, but it grew a very big cult following. And it was one of their very first attempts at a blend of live action and very basic computer graphic animation. And I think some of you may know where I'm going with this. And the movie I'm talking about is the original Tron. Now, Tron, for its time, for the 1980s, it was groundbreaking. And it had a decent cast. You had Jeff Bridges, you had Bruce Boxleitner, You had David Warner. David Warner did a lot of stuff within Star Trek. He was in some of the movies. Um, I think he might have even been in a couple of the. I can't say this for certain, but I think he was in a couple of the TV shows too. But the great thing about Tron, even though it didn't do well at the box office, as home video was getting very popular because you had the advent of the VCR, which is built off of one of the earlier versions of home video players, the Betamax, which you had VCRs coming out, and you could do all sorts of things with these VCRs. You could record stuff off the TV, or you could play tapes that were made. And you had just, it was actually an explosion of media. And later on, as VHS tapes started to get marketed, started to get into the stores and everything, Tron had legs. People remembered it. People wanted to watch it and everything because everybody heard such good things about it. It was so inventive. It was so original. And it was really ahead of its time. You have a lot of people that were inspired by that movie to go into video graphic design, to go into computer animation, go into movie making and everything. And it was just such an inspirational movie for so many people. And just speaking for myself, not somebody that went into any of the uh, into the movie making industry. Just for me, just the imagination and the storytelling within that movie was really, really cool. It was really interesting. It was like I've said already, it was ahead of its time, and I'll go into a little bit of the story within the movie itself and everything. I won't go into a lot of it because I imagine there's a lot of people who know about Tron, but for those of you who don't, the basic story of this, it takes place within a major computer company called Incom. It started off as a business and everything that was quite literally ran out of a garage. Was started just by a group of early computer programmers and designers and everything who wanted to do what they loved: build computers, build software, get into advanced tech, laser technology, all that sort of stuff. And one of the developers and everything was a guy by the name of Kevin Flynn, played by Jeff Bridges. Yeah, Jeff Bridges. And he's working for Income, and he's having a great time. He's loving what he's doing. He actually goes in. He's starting to design games of his own and everything, and he's on the verge of releasing all these games when you've got another guy come in and everything, a fellow by the name of Dillinger. I don't quite recall his first name, but he's played by David Warner. And he's kind of a sleazy guy. He's not all the way on the up and up. And what ends up happening is he pulls a fast one on Flynn, and he pretty much snatches all the games that Flynn designed right out from underneath him. And there's a big whoop-de-doo within the company. Dillinger gets Flynn canned. Flynn goes off into town and everything, and he, I don't know exactly how he does it, but he starts his own video arcade. And I'll tell you, for those of you who didn't grow up in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, and the early aughts, the early 2000s, video arcades were the thing. You could go in there and you put quarter into a video game trying the heck to beat it. I don't know how many hours I myself as a kid spent in these video arcades, but I loved it. And I imagine that for those of you who remember video arcades, I know they're starting to make kind of a comeback and everything. I'm actually really happy for this because going to an arcade, competing against your best bud, or competing against a complete stranger on a video game, it was a rush. Or going through a story game where you had multiple players that worked cooperatively. And arcade gaming was one of the very first places where you had cooperative games. I remember one game in particular. Well, actually, there were a couple, um, and they came out, I think, in the late '80s, maybe into the '90s. One was the X-Men arcade game, where you could select a group of, I think it was like 4 or 5 X-Men. It was Colossus, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Dazzler, and I think Cyclops. and there were like 4 or 5 of you on this one game, and you just fought your way through all these levels. And it was a side scroller because that was what gaming was at the time. It was all side scroll. There wasn't all this uh, advanced graphics like we have now, and all this in-depth immersion that you have in video games. But it was such a great game. But game back to Tron. Um, Basically, what ends up happening is Dillinger's gotten up into the higher ranks of the company. He's pretty much running the show. But what you don't know is he's partnered with a very primitive artificial intelligence, which is called the Master Control Program. And the MCP, this program's kind of gotten a big head, and the program's breaking into all these other businesses. He's broken into the government, but nobody knows. But what ends up happening in the movie, um, Flynn gets caught trying to find the data and everything on the games that he had created that Dillinger had stolen. And um, Dillinger finds out, the MCP alerts him, says, hey, I think Flynn tried to get in here again and tried to get to that data that you had stolen from him. And a certain group of people's access within the company is cut out. Now, another actor that's in this and everything that I've alluded to before is Bruce Boxleitner. And Bruce Boxleitner is in this. This is one of his earlier roles and everything. And he did reprise his role in the sequel, Tron Legacy. I think the it was in the 2000s. I do remember. I don't remember exact year, but that's not important. So you've got Flynn. You've got oh, for heaven's sake, what's the name of Bruce Boxleitner's character? Oh, you know what? It's not important. What ends up happening is Flynn's character, Bruce Boxleitner, and one other character and everything, they don't break in and everything, but they infiltrate Incom. And because the other two characters still work there, and they help Flynn infiltrate the building. And Flynn goes into a very not restricted, secluded area within the building, and Dillinger doesn't even know any of them are there. And Flynn is trying to look up the data for his stolen games. What ends up happening is the MCP pops up on screen and says, "Hey, Flynn, long time no see. Remember when we used to play chess?" And um, here's a twist of the movie. There's another world that actually exists within all these linked computers and everything. It's something called the grid, or the gaming plane, and everybody's got pretty much a one-to-one corollary within. Well, at least the main characters: Dillinger, Flynn, Bruce Boxleitner's character, and the other girl. Again, I don't remember her name. I don't even remember the actress's name. But anyhow, there's a whole other world going on and everything inside all the computers and everything, and it's a very surreal place. But what ends up happening is the MCP gains access to a digitizing laser and pretty much digitizes Flynn's character and drags him down into the gaming grid. And the MCP tells his lieutenant, Sark, who looks like David Warner's character, Dillinger, I want you to train him up, get him into the games, and then eliminate him. Long story short. Um, and that's just the graphics within that part of the movie are so, for the time, for the 1980s, they were very impressive. For us now in 2019, they might not hold up as well, but it gives you an idea of what they were going for, what they were trying to show visually within the movie. And long story short, um, Flynn, along with Bruce Boxleitner's program Tron, which is basically like a watchdog program. Think of Tron like a very early version of an antivirus monitoring program, kind of like one of the ones that you would download for your computer or whatever. But it works on a much larger scale. What ends up happening is Flynn, Tron, and I think the female actress's um, um, representation within the gaming grid is called Yuri. They are able to get to the MCP core. Flynn jumps in to into the core and retrieves the data, actually gets out of the gaming grid, leaves Tron and Yuri behind, but he frees the system from the control of the MCP, and pretty much Dillinger gets booted out, and Flynn gets replaces Dillinger as head of Incom. So, but that was Tron in a nutshell. It was a great movie for the 1980s, and even now in 2019, and even the sequel, which I'll get into it and everything maybe at some other point. It was a great movie. It wasn't the most profitable for Disney right as it was released, but it was still a really good, imaginative flick, and it inspired a lot of people. And I'll say, when I was a kid, when we had cable and we had the Disney Channel and so on, anytime Tron came on, I was like, "Mom, my movie's coming on." I'll be in the living room for a while, and she'd be like, "Okay, honey, go ahead, go watch your movie. It's all right." And believe it or not, and everything, my mom, and I'll go into a little bit of her and everything. She was born in the late 1940s. She was a member of the baby boomer generation, and it was my mom and dad and everything that inspired me to get into all this stuff, because my mom grew up in like the cinema of the 1950s and 1960s, when you had all the movie serials and you had the early really cheesy but some were really good sci-fi movies like This Island Earth, Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, all of that sort of stuff. My mom and my dad encouraged me and everything to be like, if this is something you love, enjoy it, get into it and everything, because life's too short to just sit around and be bored and miserable and everything. And I will say this: my father sadly passed away when I was 7 years old, and this was in 1984. It was a year after um, Return of the Jedi came out, and I'll do a separate video on that. I know a lot of people have done videos on Return of the Jedi, but Return of the Jedi came out in the 1980s, and I want to go into that a little bit. Um, just my own personal retrospective, anyway. But my parents very much encouraged me. It was okay to be a nerd, to be a geek, to not be ashamed of it, to not let anybody bully you about it. Love what you love, like what you like, and if somebody asks for your opinion, share it. And that's one of the philosophies I've lived my life by as a geek and as a Christian. Is don't be afraid to express yourself. And this is what that channel is for: is to express myself, to help guide others and what have you. And I've talked about this before in passing, but this will be an ongoing series. We will be covering the 1980s. I'll be covering a lot of the big stuff, and even some really, like I said, really obscure stuff. So if you enjoy this, and I hope that y'all do, and I know I haven't done this in my other videos, but I'm going to start getting in the habit. If you're enjoying what I'm putting out, and there is more to come, there's a whole lot more to come. Like, share, subscribe, and if you want to share your thoughts, comment below. And until next time, as our good friend Ambassador Kosh said,